I find artificial intelligence to be fascinating because it's taking the most essential aspect of humanity and what defines us, and it's trying to replicate it in a machine. So, in a sense, it's almost like the end of the road of taking human qualities and replicating them in machines, because it is our intelligence, which is like what defines us as a species. Yeah, I think part of the reason why there's a reluctance is because it's brand new, the field, and I recently read a manuscript of a book that's coming out later this year called Our Final Invention, and the author talked to a lot of AI professionals, and the reaction he got from a lot of them was, what about Asimov laws? So a lot of people actually really do think that Asimov's laws are like a scientific step in the direction, or have already solved the problem of like AI going out of control. So I think that that's done a tremendous amount of damage, but that the efforts of the Singularity Institute in publishing serious material have gone a long way towards getting people to think about AI risk more seriously. And we've only been publishing for the last decade, which isn't like a huge amount of time in academic terms. And the progress that we've made in that time span has been quite good by like the standards of many new scientific fields. So I'm hopeful about the future of it, and I think that AI professionals are way less dismissive of like thought on safe AI today than they were in the year 2000, for instance. No, I think that friendly AI research is completely unique because it is at the intersection of so many different areas, like philosophy, computer science, cognitive science, and it's just this unique mix of so many different things, and it deals with one of the most complicated issues that could exist, which is like the morality of human brains and how that relates to like being able to build morality from scratch in a machine. So I think it's completely unique. I think that discussing intelligence is politically controversial, very much so, and it almost like it's at the intersection of so many controversial areas, like the race, and even if we were all the same race, it would still be extremely controversial because it just has to do with innate human differences. And it wasn't until like maybe the year 2000 when like Steven Pinker really started to go forward with the blank slate, criticizing the blank slate notion of human nature, that there was even a small area carved out within mainstream psychology to look at intelligence differences. So I think that also intelligence is extremely difficult to define, and that ambiguity leaves it susceptible to being attacked as not a well nailed down concept and therefore unworthy of study. But given that it's the most important capability that we have as a species, I think that it's worth studying even if it seems ambiguous. But it's very controversial, and since the only example we have of intelligence are human beings, it requires like looking at human variation and differences in intelligence. And I think that there is a swing in the right direction where it's becoming more acceptable to talk about intelligence. And I think that as we sequence more genomes, and especially as the Chinese take the lead in cross-referencing many thousands of genomes and trying to find those alleles that are responsible for contributing to variation in intelligence, they'll become more acceptable. But even still, like studies have found that there's no one allele that is accountable for more than 1% of the variation in intelligence. So it is difficult to nail down with genetics as well, which means it continues to be ambiguous. And I think that until there's an interesting or like fundamental, substantial breakthrough in the area of connecting genetics to intelligence, then there might be like more reluctance. But if if there is a breakthrough like that, then I think that could make it a lot more acceptable, and it could kind of crack open the area of intelligence studies. Yeah, I think that the biases in academia almost perfectly reflect biases outside of academia, and the academics are completely similar to like casual intellectuals or even like average folks on the street, and that the notion like that they have their own like highfalutin academic reasons for like saying these are unscientific is totally wrong. Like the reason why academics are afraid to discuss intelligence is the exact same reason why people are afraid to discuss intelligence like at the family dinner table or something. It's because it's a controversial topic. It has to do with innate human differences. It opens up the notion of like social class, which is another like hard part. And this is, you know, like 100 years ago, people didn't have any issue with discussing these differences. It was just like, it was accepted that there were differences in innate capability. And I think that people still do accept it like more deep down now, but on the surface, it's politically incorrect. So when it comes to discussing intelligence, that it's just considered like politically challenging area, that people can lose their jobs by having the wrong findings. And science, like there are so many people in science that use it just to confirm their pre-existing biases, and it's not like the idea that science is like this rarefied like separate realm than the rest of like intellectual inquiry, like casual intellectual inquiry, is completely wrong. It's just, it's part of the same like firmament that all other thought is, and it's only through like many decades of tremendous amounts of evidence that things can change. So I'm not really that like hopeful about the future of studying intelligence, but I'm more hopeful about the future of studying friendly artificial intelligence, because it connects to an area that is economically important, which is artificial intelligence. And if it doesn't involve studying human variation in intelligence, that's not politically incorrect. It's okay to study intellectual variation in machine intelligence because it's not human beings. So I think I'm hopeful that as AI in general gets better, it'll be okay to look at artificial intelligence and how to create safe artificial intelligence. And in many ways, engineering artificial intelligence doesn't actually have necessarily a lot to do with human intelligence and the way intelligence works in humans and the way friendliness works in humans. There might be big differences there. I'm confident that people like Shane Legg, for instance, who actually came up with a definition of a metric for intelligence, a mathematical metric for intelligence, presented at the Singularity Summit in 2011, I believe it was. I think that there will eventually come up with like a mathematical definition of intelligence, and we'll be able to put different systems on this, like, maybe it might not be a continuum, it might be more like a 2D or like 3D space with several complex variables, but we will develop metrics for intelligence, and I think it's only a matter of time before we do so. And I think that's one of the, I wouldn't consider it to be like maybe part of the top like 3 or 4 most important areas of like long-term AGI research, but I think it is among maybe like the top 10 or so, and that progress can happen without it, but it would help a lot more if we had better metrics, and there are people who are developing them. I think that to some extent it kind of is, in the sense, not like that intelligence will resist formalization, but the definitions of intelligence that can be formalized and will be formalized and applied to AI will be so broad that they actually lose a lot of their value. Whereas like human formalizations of intelligence are more useful, since we all have like the same basic cognitive architecture, and we vary more like quantitatively than qualitatively, so it's easier to like put your finger on smarter people or dumber people. But whereas AIs could be like specialists in completely different areas, so like there might be one environment that's like blocks and lines that AI is super customized, like running through very quickly, another one that's like squiggles and blobs, and it's a failure at the squiggles and blobs, but there's another AI that's fantastic at that. And so like it will be like at such fun, it'll always have to do with like the task at hand, like what are you asking the system to do. And there's such a diversity of environments, and a lot of the, especially like the toy environments that we'll use for testing AIs, are extremely diverse. So it's very difficult to define like what it's always intelligence is relative to an environment. So it always depends on what environment you're talking about, and people, if you're not agreeing on this precise environment, then it's very difficult to talk about that. I mean, the notion like that AI is possible in principle is something that should have been realized since like Church-Turing thesis in the 50s. So, and maybe there was just like a 60-year delay while people like were having trouble like coming to terms with where the philosophical arguments are leading. So, it would take. I think that like realizing that AI or human level artificial intelligence is possible. It's just something like that people are getting around to today because like. Computers and smartphones and all those other things they're all around us, and they're so ubiquitous and obvious that we can't like avoid the topic anymore, whereas we could for the last 60 years. But like beyond that, I don't think that there is anything fundamentally philosophically new that we've discovered like in the last 10 years that points to artificial general intelligence being like especially like closer or easier than people that did accept Church-Turing thesis like 20 or 30 years ago couldn't have known, and that and yeah, there's no like cause for renewed optimism whatsoever. I mean, there's no cause for pessimism either. Like, I recently saw a talk by Stuart Armstrong at the Singularity Summit that was fascinating because he collated together 100. Him and Kai Satala collated 100 AI predictions and found that there was a general bias towards AI being 20 years in the future. And aside from that, like no patterns whatsoever among the predictions. So and also there's no like feedback from making predictions in AI. You can't be falsified. So any area where people make predictions and there's no feedback, it's just like a complete crapshoot. And I don't think that we can predict when AI will really arrive. And I used to think that you could use like the improvements in computing power to like approximate a date when AI might be developed. But I don't think that there's any cause for optimism or pessimism. It'll just be a slow grind until we get there. I think it's all like really disconnected, and that using like algorithm design and computing power at best are very like general approximations. And I think there is an argument to be made that artificial general intelligence will be developed within the next century, and that's generally like where I put my like 80% confidence interval would be like in the next century. But that's a pretty wide confidence interval, and we really just don't know. I think that those kind of examples that you're talking about more like get people to take the concept of artificial general intelligence seriously to begin with, and that it's important from getting people to go from AGI is impossible to getting them to think about AGI may be possible in the next century. But as far as like narrowing it down, it's all very speculative. I think that the AI pessimists are in a really bad situation whereby they basically rely on like pseudo-religious arguments. The true pessimists, where they say like AI will be centuries off, like Douglas Hofstadter, it's so transparent that his motivation is like humans are great and it would be so disappointing if the complexity of humans were reduced to algorithms. Like he straight up says this in an interview. So if your motivation is like so fluffy, then you're not an intellectually serious person and you don't have a serious argument whatsoever. So like if you're using like quasi-spiritual or metaphysical like foundation, and unfortunately like this seems to be more prominent in those that are older, like people that are over like especially those who are like over 70 or so. It seems like they're part of this old way of thinking about humanity, and that these are just like the last gasps of that old way of thinking. Whereas if you look for like serious academic arguments for why AI will be like centuries away or never developed, it's almost nearly impossible to find any. Like I spent days at one point a few years ago trying to look for citations that I could find Herbert Dravis's book What Computers Can't Do, which is like almost 20 years old. And aside from that, like it just doesn't seem like there are very many serious arguments, and they just appeals to intuition. So I think the most serious AI pessimists are completely wrong, and I do disagree with them. But I also very aggressively disagree with anyone that says AI is going to be developed within 5, 10, 20 years, whether we try or not, or saying like that, or even like getting so precise as to say like 5 million, like to say like if 5 million or $10 million would make a difference between like a year or two. Like the notion that people can make such precise predictions is ridiculous to me. So I disagree just as aggressively with people that think that the singularity can be dated to like the year 2045 as if it was like future history, like dates on the line kind of a thing. That's complete BS as well. Oh boy. Well, I mean, if it's a phenomenon that exists, then it is being computed by the matter on which it is running, so therefore it is computable. That's kind of like a flippant answer, but if we choose to view arrangements of matter as like Turing machines or information processors, which I do, then every phenomenon is inherently computable, yes. But is like every algorithm computable? No. Like there are certain like algorithms, or there are certain like processes that we don't know whether they're computable or not, or what complexity class they fall into, and that's like something for theoretical computer scientists to argue about. And I'm not a theoretical computer scientist, so I can't give any detailed commentary on that. I think that there was like a burst of irrational exuberance in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that it's a completely different like world now, and that if anything, like the attention towards AGI has gone up slowly over the last few years, and the funding has gone up slowly. Like I think the Founders Fund or Clarion venture capital firm is funding like 3 different AI projects, including Vicarious, which is led by Dilip George, who used to work with Jeff Hawkins. So if anything, I'm seeing like a lot more interest in artificial general intelligence. There was just like a prominent article in the New York Times about developments in AI called deep learning, which combines like Bayesian classification with hierarchically based like control structures. So it seems like there's an increased interest, and if you plot the number mentions of AI on a graph, it goes up in the last like few years, and it's continuing to increase. I think there are a lot of like different reasons why people might like not buy into the idea of an intelligence explosion. One of them is just like it's what Robin Hanson would call FAR mode. Like it's just this part of category of ideas that's considered very speculative, and that when people like dismiss the notion of intelligence explosion, it might be more just like they don't like considering things that are so far out there, more than they object to it based on like logical arguments. So for most people that are iconoclastic about it, I just say like, whatever, and wait to see them come around when the AI that we actually use in our daily lives gets better and better. I don't think that most people like that can be like their thoughts can be changed by like arguments. But when it comes to like those people that do put forward actual arguments, I often reply to them at length on my blog. So for any of those that do, I'm willing to reply like point by point to the more detailed arguments. Like I just published a pretty lengthy response to Kevin Kelly's notion that the hard takeoff is an implausible scenario. So, and I sent him an email, and he said that he will look into it. So I'm hoping for a response. But I'll just take one at a time. The dogma that we can predict the exact date of the singularity by putting together a bunch of curves is one that I heavily disagree with. I think that the similar story among like a lot of singularitarians is that they get into this through Kurzweil and then completely don't take many of Kurzweil's conclusions seriously after they read for like a year or two. So And that, in that sense, like, there's actually a big gap in the movement between like the casual Kurzweil fans and like communities around Singularity University and those that are more interested like in serious academic study of a world transforming event, the Singularity, in at some point in the future. So there's a lot that I disagree with that first group, and then when it comes to the second group, I don't know, there's probably like less that I disagree with them on, but it's like we're a formative movement, so people have lots of different ideas, and while there is like a lot of consensus on some of the most important concepts, like the need for friendliness and artificial intelligence, when it comes to like the details of that, there's no real dogma. Like some people have like accused the Singularity Institute of having like a dogmatic flavor or something, but it's funny because we pay to have people criticize the CV work, which is a paper or proposal for friendly AI put forth by Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's one of our founders. Like, we pay our people to criticize our founder, you know, intellectually, and like make progress on ideas like that. So every idea is up for grabs, and anyone that provides criticism is doing us a great service. Anyone that, you know, says what they really think is doing a great service. The Singularity Institute are the people that realized that artificial intelligence could improve beyond the human level quite quickly once it reaches a certain threshold, like roughly human equivalence, and that we should do something about it. So, like, even that notion existed in Terminator, where Sarah Connor was trying to do something about it by like assassinating the guy that developed artificial intelligence. I'd like to think of what we're doing as a much friendlier and academically serious like attempt at trying to save the world from the risk of unfriendly artificial intelligence. So while a lot of people like laugh at it because of the fictional associations, there's a lot of support among serious academics towards looking into these issues, and we're taking the lead. The main goal of the Singularity Summits is to bring together scientists and other thought leaders that are working on things that are tangentially related to the concept of the singularity. And it's kind of like a different theme every year, and it's not necessarily like a very like total theme, like that we accept lots of deviations from any theme. But for instance, like in 2010, we had a theme around like animal intelligence, because like animal intelligence lets us draw different it lets us draw points in a space of possible intelligences instead of just looking at human intelligence. So generally, like, we take a kind of some loose theme and build up people around it, and getting people to comment, because very few people discuss the singularity directly, so it's usually people that discuss areas related to emerging technologies in general. And it's a very general conference that is not necessarily focused like a laser beam on the singularity specifically, but generally like a third to a half of the speakers will actually discuss the singularity specifically, or areas that are traditionally considered to be like core areas of singularity studies. I think one of the main things about the Singularity Summit is it's partially like getting exposure to the ideas of the singularity movement through talks, but it's also like physically meeting people in person and meeting some of the smartest people in the world in person. I mean, the group that talks around the singularity issues really are some of the smartest people in the world, and it's a unique opportunity to get to talk to people like that. And it's really relevant to like recruiting people for a company or getting hired at a good company, and having a feeling of belonging and camaraderie with people that think big thoughts about long-term future issues. So I think it's mainly like the social element that's the biggest benefit of attending the summit. So artificial intelligence is the broad field of computer science projects that attempt to replicate facets of human intelligence, and oftentimes, like, any cutting-edge computer science research is called artificial intelligence. And then, like, after 5 to 10 years after it's their success in that area just becomes like part of the rest of software. So artificial intelligence is a very like broad and heterogeneous classification. Can mean a tremendous amount of different things. It's often can be used as like just a label to raise funds and make yourself sound more interesting. If you're doing something in computer science that's even a little bit complicated. So that's artificial intelligence, and then artificial general intelligence is something that is much more ambitious, which is creating a machine that can think as effectively as a human in all domains, or can be a general reasoner that can improve its own thoughts and solve problems that the programmers didn't plan for it to solve, and engage like in cross-domain reasoning and actually have a real impact on the real world and create beings that could become part of society or be equals or to human beings. So one is a lot more challenging and complex than another, and I think that artificial general intelligence also invokes a lot more different scientific fields, including like philosophy, and it delves more into like the foundations of artificial intelligence, whereas most artificial intelligence in general is applying already existing paradigms in computing, whereas AGI is more about developing brand new paradigms at the lowest level. I generally put it like 80% chance. I think it's fairly likely unless there's like a nuclear war that sets us back very far. It's clear like computers have been getting a lot faster. We already have computers today that reach some of the lowest estimates of the computing power of the human brain. So it's only a matter of time before we have computers that you can fit in the palm of your hand with the computing power of a human brain. And I think then the most fundamental barrier will be lifted, but we'll still like need a lot of human ingenuity to figure out how to program intelligence. But since I'm like basically a naturalist that doesn't believe like in magical pixie dust or anything, I think just a matter of time before complex systems like that are reverse engineered. So even if we don't like come up with the theory of intelligence that we can then use to create artificial general intelligence, we'll be able to just scan and copy the algorithms of the human brain as they work, and some of them have already been scanned and copied. So it's just like that'll be a engineering project that won't require any like fundamental philosophical breakthroughs, and if the philosophical approach doesn't succeed, then the engineering approach will. Yeah, I think that is the most crucial issue in all of transhumanism and singularity studies and futurism in general, and anyone that cares about like the future past the next like 20-30 years. That's like the crucial, most important insight and thing, is the notion that once you have an artificial intelligence that's roughly around the human level, there are a lot of opportunities and reasons to believe that it could improve itself a lot faster, a lot more quickly. And a lot of those reasons have to do with like certain inherent aspects of computers that are part of the way computers work. Like if you can speed up a program in a computer and it doesn't change the nature of the program. So if you have a computer that can take an algorithm and make it go 10 times faster, then it just will. So if you apply that to intelligence and artificial intelligence, if you build like a roughly human level intelligence on a like $1 million computer, and it's doing so well that's giving you a lot of money, like in a company or whatever, you can buy like a $10 million computer that can run it twice as fast or 10 times as fast, then you'll do that. And it can even happen on a much more fine-grained level, like cloud computing is an example. So there's a lot of other advantages. Copying. Artificial intelligence could utilize the world's computers to copy itself. Never needing to sleep. Never getting bored. The capability of performing repetitive tasks endlessly. The capability of breaking itself up into different pieces to do different subtasks. These are all like capabilities that more or less like come for free with the substrate on which the AI will run. And the combining AI of the roughly human level with computers will lead to, with the inherent advantages of computers, could quickly lead to what's called an intelligence explosion, where an AI improves itself more rapidly than anyone really anticipated, and you go from roughly human level to vastly super intelligent within a relatively short period of time. And because intelligence is what humans have used to take control of the world and to defend ourselves, and it's basically our superpower as a species, a entity that rapidly becomes a lot smarter than us will therefore probably have the ability to make itself a lot more powerful than us physically in very short order. Like, once you have the intelligence, getting the physical power thing comes very quickly and easily, especially when we're talking about vastly greater than human intelligence. So I think that everyone on the planet has a reason to be very concerned, and that in some point in the next 30 to 100 years, we're going to have to confront this intelligence explosion challenge. And we want the AI that triggers the first intelligence explosion to care about human beings, because if it doesn't, we're pretty much screwed. I think the most important conversion outcome is just economic demand for artificial intelligence, which is tremendous and gets bigger by the day. Especially like as society and science gets more and more computerized, there's more data and there's more opportunities for computers and artificial intelligence to be used. So while there's like a tremendous market for artificial intelligence and computer software today, and we use it constantly, that market will only continue to get bigger and bigger. And as more people get on the internet, there'll be more of a market for artificial intelligence. So there's many tens of billions of dollars that are flooding into this area and are going to continue to do so. So that is the number one driver towards intelligence explosion. And the second one is just mere intellectual curiosity about intelligence. Like, we've been curious. Like, unless we're going to stop being curious about ourselves or the way our brains work, we're going to keep studying intelligence, and we're going to want to duplicate it in a computer, because we won't be able to demonstrate that we really understand it until we can actually program it. You don't understand something until you can actually build it. So those twin drivers are going to lead us very likely to an intelligence explosion sometime this century. I think that it would be wiser to try to solve certain important open problems in friendly artificial intelligence before trying to build anything. And that if you don't see like that there are certain very important open problems, like the issue of giving the AI a criterion by which to evaluate changes to its own code. If you don't like see that those are important open problems that can be thought about in advance, then you're not really qualified to be working on friendly AI to begin with anyway. So if you say that you need to develop artificial general intelligence to get any of a handle whatsoever on the friendliness issue, then it just shows that you are ignorant and you haven't thought about the problem hard enough to see that there are certain open problems that you can address in advance. Like, advances in AI themselves are subjective, and technological advancements in general are subjective. Like, that's why I actually don't think that you can predict that technological development is accelerating at all, because the quality of any given advancement is more or less subjective. Only when it comes to like certain very quantitative things, like that computer processing speed, can you measure something objectively. So yeah, I don't think you can make any analysis like that. I think the number one speed bump is an unwillingness to put money and intelligence towards solving the problem. So I guess the speed bump would just be like skepticism of the plausibility of this research path, or the notion that this research path will bear fruits. So skepticism is the number one speed bump. But thankfully, as huge companies keep putting many millions of dollars into AI development and develop artificial intelligence that makes a huge impact on our daily lives, it gets harder and harder to say that AI progress isn't useful. It gets harder to say that we won't eventually build artificial general intelligence. so people are compelled to come around and take it more seriously, which is why like major figures like Peter Norvig that are major contributors to the core of artificial intelligence do take artificial general intelligence seriously, even if they aren't expecting it to be developed tomorrow. Yeah, I think that technological innovation has been slowing down since the turn of the millennium. And I forget what magazine, I think Business Week did a good piece on it called like The End of Innovation. That was in 2010 that basically took a look at like the number of patents and like breakthroughs in the last decade compared to the 90s, and found that the zeros were not nearly as innovative as the 90s, and that there was actually a decline in innovation. And I think that this was even independently of the economic dip or recession that the whole planet essentially, or most of the planet, is in right now. But that just exacerbates the issue as well. And like seeing America and Europe struggle so intensely right now. And if you look like at economic history of America, like usually every recession in the last century, except for the Great Depression, has lasted like 8 to 11 months. Whereas now it seems like we're in a multi-year recession. So that's very economically unprecedented, and I think that part of the impact of that is that people will spend less money on research and development and spend more money on like going back to the basics. And also like when governments try to take a hand in like subsidizing green energy and that kind of thing, they sometimes make poor decisions that the free market would make. Like, I'm not saying the free market's like the magical solution to every problem, but when governments make uninformed decisions about the way they allocate research funds, they can just go up and billions of dollars can go up in smoke. So I think that we are suffering from a lack of innovation, and I don't know how long it will take for us to pull ourselves out of it. I don't think like all the low-hanging fruit has been taken, and even if you look at history, oftentimes like some of the pieces for creating a certain scientific development are around for like hundreds of years, and just like no one that was smart enough to figure it out. So it could be like a similar situation today, where like we're not using the right like ways of approaching problems, or like the social structure of universities are such that people are encouraged just to pursue the research interests of their advisors, and young scientists in the ages of like the 20s and 30s are completely locked out of grant money in the way where older tenured professors control the majority of grant money. So I think that our rigid system of science, social organization of science, holds back innovation by withholding funds from younger scientists. So until those barriers are lifted, I think it's difficult to say like anything about the inherent like fitness landscape of scientific discovery, which is very difficult to say anything conclusive about. I think that we're reaching the limits of standard photolithography techniques for creating new chips, and I'm curious about what the next computing paradigm will be. Like Kurzweil very confidently says it will be like 3D computing, and then but he also lists like 7 or 8 different possible next paradigm computing processes. This was back in 2005 that he listed these. And I think that there's been remarkably little progress in fundamental research towards next generation computing paradigms, and like no one's built or the research on like trying to hybridize like carbon nanotubes with conventional computer chips is very primitive. Mostly people are just making trying to build like new they're trying to use basically more energy intense, shorter wavelength forms of light to etch chips, and that they're running out there. So I'm curious to see what the next paradigm will be, and I think what the next paradigm is will have a significant impact on progress towards an intelligence explosion. So depending on how far forward we go in that next paradigm, or whether it just sputters out and Moore's law be broken in the next 10 years. We don't know. Like, for the most part, it's been a self-fulfilling prophecy because Moore's law is the guideline used to develop chips. But if there's no new technology to make it happen, then it won't necessarily happen. I don't think that the future of Moore's law is by any means certain, and that I expected a lot more progress on like next generation computing by now, and there hasn't been. So I think that is a very important factor. And then the extent to which academics and the economic elite choose to care about artificial intelligence and how much effort they put into it is the other major factor there. So those two could combine to make the timeline for artificial general intelligence differ by like 10, 20, or even maybe 30 years. I think it's interesting that the major progress in AI in the last few years has been through big data, and to me it shows that there's actually been a paucity of good ideas, because big data is kind of like a brute force, stupid approach. Not stupid like in a sense that the people that are doing it are stupid, but in the sense that we aren't coming up with new algorithms as readily that are super useful, so instead of like using a formal process, we're dependent on these massive data sets because, hey, the data is there, we might as well use it. And that's how basically translation was solved with Google Translate, through massive data sets. And that's how a lot of progress in AI today is happening and will continue to happen. But if you look at like the history of improvements in algorithms and in computer science, like a lot of major steps happen when like, people come up with really good new algorithms, and then there's discontinuous jumps in performance when someone comes up with an awesome new algorithm. But when it comes to big data, I think it's more like when you go from not using big data at all to using it, then there's a major jump. But once you've made that jump, then the progress from there on will be incremental. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of areas in AI that make that jump and then level off. But I think that the capabilities on the other end of that jump are going to be pretty awesome, but eventually we'll actually be forced to come up with better algorithms again. Securing the survival of the human species is the most important first mover motivation for developing friendly artificial intelligence. And everything that's a subset of that, like preserving the integrity of your country, whatever it may be, preserving the integrity of the world system, these are all the first mover advantages of getting AGI right the first time. It's basically like a source of tremendous power, because intelligence is the most powerful force in the universe that we know about. So it's basically a matter of life and death with regard to the most powerful force in the universe. That eventually, like, the line of low-level carrots does get to AGI, but that we can cut the time in half by specifically working towards AGI. So while it might take 100 years getting there the slow way, we could get there through 50 years the quicker way. So I think that there is a huge advantage to not just taking advantage of the incremental route. And while most of the largest companies and governments will be going on that slower incremental route, I hope that really cutting edge groups take a more deep philosophical, trying to re-engineer AI from the ground up kind of approach. And that's why nonprofits can make a big difference, is because nonprofits like the Singularity Institute, for instance, aren't necessarily motivated by we're not motivated by near-term economic profit, since we're not trying to make money the way that a company would. So we can afford to make bigger steps that require deeper research over a longer period of time, but bear greater fruits when the research is done. Completely. Yeah, I think the first artificial intelligence to reach human equivalence probably won't be as general as humans in a lot of important ways. It probably it might not even it might not have any sense of humor, it might not have any sense of artistic appreciation or aesthetic beauty or anything like that, but it might be extremely effective at like putting plans into action in the world to increase its power, or like trade stocks very effectively, or come up with new strategies to trade stocks in better ways. So I think that because it's probably easier in some ways to make more specialized systems, and it's more computationally efficient to make systems that are more highly specialized to particular goals. So I think that the balance of domain competencies in AI could be radically different than that in human beings, and that's kind of like one of the cases in point for why AIs could be radically alien, and we shouldn't expect the like traditional human way of making other humans nice to you, like through diplomacy, to work, because the balance of domain competencies, there will not be like common ground in the way that human beings, even of completely different cultures, have with one another. And I think that it'll be a lot of bias and a lot of helpfulness in focusing on more narrow problems and being as narrow as possible while still being general enough to have a tremendous impact in the world. I think that it would be completely different, and there hasn't been enough good thought on this question. It's an excellent question, because it's important. What if we do end up not creating mathematical AI and do have to reverse engineer the brain? I think like the temptation is to immediately then apply our tactics for human beings to artificial intelligence, but I think that might be naive to assume that a reverse engineered from the human brain AI would even be human-like at all, like, because the resolution of copying will be at a lower level. It won't precisely copy all the aspects of a real human brain, so there'll still be very deep, important differences between like that program and human brains. So I think that it's almost scary. It's almost scarier than purely mathematical AI to me, because it's something that would be vaguely similar to human beings and would have a lot of our like innate flaws, but yet could still be so alien because of like quirks in the copying over process that we would be unable to communicate with it in the same way that we can communicate with other humans. So that's almost like my most feared scenario, and we often have to like rely on fallback procedures that are kind of like simple, like having many of them police one another, or like having carrot and stick based incentives, and other like techniques we use to manage humans that might actually not apply or be successful when applying to this new kind of a being. But I think that's a question that where we should pay researchers, to look into it in great depth, so that if we do face that situation, we have done some thought on it in advance. I think that it's difficult to make AI friendly no matter what you're talking about, because friendly behavior is a very small category of the possible spaces of behavior, and it's very difficult. It will be very difficult to make any AI friendly for any reason, and that is why the Singularity Institute exists, because we see this tremendously huge problem, and we are trying to consolidate the smartest people in the world, or the smartest, especially mathematicians and philosophers in the world, to figure it out. And that's the topic of all of our research. So if people are interested in that, I'd say to take a look at the research page at singularity.org. Some of the major open problems from the AI overlap with open problems in advanced AI in general. Like, one of them is reflectivity, which is AI giving it the capability of evaluating itself and evaluating its own program. There's no computer program that really does that in a formal, rigorous way. Another important problem is making sure that AIs deal with epistemological or epistemic uncertainty about philosophical questions in an intelligent way. Like, if something is an unknown, like, to what degree is it an unknown? And like this very quickly gets into like highly technical, like theoretical computer science and philosophical questions about artificial intelligence. see, there's an open question of how much effort do we put between developing a good architecture and developing what's called sometimes called friendliness acquisition, the process of transferring the knowledge that we want into that architecture. And one of our associate researchers, Daniel Dewey, wrote a paper called Learning What to Value, about the concept of value learning and applying some of the tactics from normal machine learning to the notion of value learning. How do we make it so that AIs don't overvalue? How do we make it so that AIs allow changes to their utility function and don't aggressively protect their utility function from any kind of update is another big issue. And I think if you look at lukeprog.com, go to the piece called "So You Want to Save the World," there's a page there that has a list of about 10 important open problems in friendly AI. We're trying to develop ideas that could be applied to different types of AI projects and wouldn't be overly specialized to our philosophical positions or anything like that. And one of our three core research focuses, one of them is AI values / goals. Another is strategy, and a third is AI in general. And strategy being one of our three main focus areas means that we take into consideration questions like that, what if someone in a foreign country wants to develop artificial general intelligence? How do we have a good impact on them? And for the most part, a lot of our ideas have had a broad influence in people pursuing AI, and they're at least tacitly aware of them. So we've actually partially had success, and the worldwide community of people working towards AGI is actually very small. So it's not that difficult to, if you try and have a good basis and a reputation, to put out ideas that do get picked up by people in these groups, and then they actually find themselves inadvertently using our language to describe their own efforts towards AI safety. So we introduce a framework that becomes somewhat global in nature. And that's what we're trying to do more than also plan for any possible contingency. I mean, the reason why we were initially called Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence is because we wanted to say we were pursuing artificial intelligence instead of intelligence amplification. It's not because we like artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence is cool or something. It's because we looked at these two specific possibilities of AI or intelligence amplification, and we specifically decided that AI would be easier and more effective to achieve within a given time frame. So our main goal is for there to be a positive singularity, and we're always willing to reevaluate and flexibly come up with solutions to get to that outcome. Absolutely not. I think that to build a general intelligence, there will need to be a lot of attention paid to the notion of a general problem-solving capability, and that there is a lot of work there that is not the same path as the economically productive one. So there's a lot of what would be considered basic research. So from the perspective of an investor, it's a big waste of time, because the goal is so huge and so uncertain that a huge amount of work needs to be done, and only someone that cares about really fundamental basic issues will get there. And if you look, a lot of these automated stock trading programs are only a few lines of code. I've talked to people that work in finance, and they're shocked at how simplistic a lot of these programs are, and that they're not anywhere near the level of complexity that's needed to respond flexibly to changing environmental challenges or anything unpredictable. I think that an unintended hard takeoff is something that would only happen in a project specifically working towards artificial general intelligence, and that it's likely that there would be a fair amount of advance warning. And there are a lot of milestones I think that would need to be met that would obviously be shockingly impressive and would set off a lot of alarm bells before you get to an AI that would be even close to the possibility of undergoing a hard takeoff. So I think that there will be a fair amount of warning in those areas, and there's not going to be like a automated stock trader that suddenly reaches into sentience and takes over the world. I think the most important starter way to make intelligent predictions about the intelligence explosion is to not be anthropomorphic. And the other one is to throw out moral realism. And those two together are two of the most important starting points. And anthropomorphism is the idea of viewing artificial intelligences as if they were humans and attributing human-like characteristics or traits to them. So assuming that AI would rebel if it were put under slavery. No, you could build an AI that loves being your slave forever until the end of time, has no problem with it whatsoever, because the objection to being enslaved has to do with certain human primate status, self-protection instincts that we have. It would not be in artificial intelligences. So the notion that AI rebellion could exist in a human-like way is false, for instance. Another one is moral realism, which is the concept that there's an inherent right and wrong that's floating out there somewhere in the Platonic space, as if there were right and wrong before humans came into existence and started writing about it, which there wasn't. The world, there's no inherent right or wrong in the formal philosophical sense. We basically make it up as we go along and have certain instincts about murdering is bad and try to describe those instincts as best we can, but oftentimes those instincts can get tangled with one another and be self-contradictory and that kind of thing. So when moral realists, when they look at intelligence explosion and think about a much smarter than human being, they will often assume that whatever they would do if they were in that position is therefore what an AI will do. Kill all the humans, or be nice to all the humans, or leave the planet, or whatever. All those are projections, and generally take into account moral realism, which is assuming that there's one best way of going about things. When in reality, it's much more complicated than that. There's no one best way of, there's no one best set of goals. So any advanced AI that is the end outcome of an intelligence explosion will probably have some goals somehow derived from the AI that began at the beginning of it, but just iterated many times through this complex self-improvement process. So it's very unpredictable. No, I think that is one of the simplest arguments that people use, because we didn't make AI in the last 50 years, that it'll never come about. And I think that it's actually falling by the wayside and fewer people are taking it seriously now. But there is a sensation that AI isn't near because computers just haven't made great enough achievements yet. And I'm sympathetic to some people that have those views. And to the folks that think that AI is hundreds of years away, I'd like to ask them, what milestone would change your mind? Would AI winning at Go change your mind? Would AIs being able to drive cars change your mind? Would AIs playing soccer be able to change your mind? Would AIs doing international diplomacy be able to change your mind? There's something that would change people's minds, and I think that they need to say what that would be in advance. And then I think that since AI has had a steady process of continuing progress over the last, especially the last 20 years, that whatever people say will be the thing that changes their mind will probably be invented a lot sooner than they think. And then at that time, they can then reevaluate what they thought today. I think that intuitive human, everyday guy in the street perception of AI progress is a fair intuitive metric of AI progress at a first approximation. Another one would be the extent to which more generalistic mathematical approximations of artificial intelligence, like Marcus Hooter's AIXC, the extent to which those are translated into programs that actually achieve things, is another important metric. So those two combined like works pretty well for me.